On this day, the 19th of July, Leonid Kravchuk, the very first president of Ukraine since Soviet communism fell, leaves office for the final time. Not many people in 2023 know who this man is, outside of a Wikipedia page, so I'm here to give you the lowdown of who this guy was, and how, since the 1990s, the groundwork was laid for why there was a war with Russia. Leonid Kravchuk was a former member of the Communist Party of Ukraine, under Soviet control, and instrumental in perpetrating the Soviet Union's propaganda department for culture and media, aka the Agitprop. The Agitprop stands for the Central Committee Directorate of Agitation and Propaganda. But unlike movies and television that we see here in the West, that will showcase some sort of subtle means of infiltration in the minds of the youth, there was no need to be so subtle. This was an open wing of the Soviet propaganda arm. According to author Susan Grant, Agitprop was an integral part of Soviet life, as the regime sought to legitimize itself and gain support and popularity. But in its Soviet context, Agitprop was not a pejorative concept. It was not a covert campaign of indoctrination, but rather a highly publicized, orchestrated effort applied in a genuinely positive sense to achieve ostensibly positive results. Kravchuk became chief of this department for the Ukraine and was responsible for the manipulation of information to always be positive for the Soviet authorities. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, even though the Soviet Union could not have foreseen what was to come, these years marked the beginning of the end for the Union due to many precipitating factors, including, but not limited to, the Ukrainian breakaway. It's noted that as the Communist Party and Ukraine as a whole began to split in 1990, Kravchuk tried to carve out a middle ground. Although he had previously been the scourge of nationalist dissidents, he understood the new reality. From the outset, it would appear that Kravchuk had a change of heart and left communist ideology behind, and this is what mainstream media would have you believe. However, allow me to paint you a different scenario when you consider the following quote. Leonid Kravchuk, chairman of the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada, limited his advocacy to transforming the USSR into a confederation of sovereign republics until the failure of the August 1991 putsch. Only then did he back full Ukrainian independence from the USSR. If I were a cynical man, I would say that he was hedging his bets to see where the wind would blow, and only when it was in his favor did he act. Between the 24th of August and the 5th of December 1991, he became acting president of the Ukraine. He gained this position by default, as at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, he was the chairman of the Supreme Soviet of the Ukrainian SSR, giving him automatic absolute power over Ukraine. He would later become the first elected president on the 5th of December 1991 as the candidate for the Social Democratic Party of Ukraine, a party that during his tenure as president was completely dysfunctional, so much so that Leonid Kravchuk was both unwilling and unable to organize anything like a party of power for Ukraine's first post-Soviet election in 1994. This is reflected throughout his presidency, as his lackluster leadership gave rise to authoritarian tendencies when conflict resolution broke down. Because executives are elected for fixed terms, the conflict cannot be resolved until the next election. One of two outcomes is likely, neither of which is conducive to strengthening a new democracy. If the parliament and president have roughly equal powers, stalemate can persist, and legitimacy of the system can be cast into doubt. If the president has substantially greater power than parliament, then the president may use extraordinary measures to reduce the influence of parliament and to rule undemocratically. Ukraine has suffered both of these problems, the first in the early years under President Kravchuk, who was constrained by the parliament and shared his power with the prime minister, and the second under Kuchma, who used his considerable powers and augmented them. So why do the West, and more importantly Ukraine's current management, aka the current president, show such reverence for him? The answer is power and greed. Answers that sound simplistic on the face of it, but have, as you will soon see, a direct implication for the issues of today, i.e. the Russian-Ukrainian war. So how does this connect to the current war? Two reasons: Ukrainian nuclear disarmament and NATO partnership for peace. In the 1990s, Ukraine and Russia had a war of words over the state of the Ukraine's nuclear arsenal. These weapons were the property of the Soviet Union, of which Ukraine was an extension. In the end, the United States brokered an agreement known as the Lisbon Protocol, which can be solidified in a letter to George W. Bush, where Kravchuk stated that Ukraine shall guarantee the elimination of all nuclear weapons, including strategic offensive arms. For which, on the face of it, seems that all parties are moving ahead with peace. But that would only apply if Ukraine acted as a buffer zone between the East and the West. And with this protocol coming into effect, this could have easily been achieved, but Kravchuk and the United States had other ideas. Due to Ukraine's withdrawal from the Soviet Union, and thus beginning the breakup of the Soviet states, this forced a re-evaluation on part of the United States about Ukraine's role in the world. No longer an enemy state, but a potential ally against Russia. An ally right on their border. The United States was consequently forced to reconsider the geopolitics of the region and gradually came to link its own security in part with stability in Ukraine, a security link that would ultimately antagonize the new Russia. Under President Kravchuk, Ukraine and NATO formally established ties in 1992, when the country joined the NACC, the North Atlantic Cooperation Council. This being a precursor to the inclusion of Ukraine as the first post-Soviet nation to become part of the Partnership for Peace. After first proposing and agreeing on the Partnership for Peace as the primary focus for NATO's eastern outreach, the Clinton administration's push for enlargement reached critical mass by the fall of 1994. In 1994, Ukraine had become NATO's Cuba, capable of being a launching pad to strike at the heart of Russia. Now, as you can imagine, the new modern Russia saw this as business as usual for what they perceived as Western aggression. Difference now, though, is there's no iron curtain to shield the heart of the motherland. The enemy was right on their doorstep. This video was about the day Kravchuk left office, but really, it's about everything leading up to the day he left. This is a man that I personally believe is responsible for laying the foundation for our current woes, and that ultimately, despite his facade of being a supporter of democracy, I believe he never left his communist spirit behind, and thus demonstrates that Ukraine has been run by different authoritarians over the years whose only care is wealth and position. They all want to assert control on a country so fractured it doesn't know where it belongs in the world. It is only propped up by the US thanks to the overwhelming financial aid that has been given and the fact that the American government thinks it needs them. Before I end, I think it's only appropriate that I mention some additional or maybe some outside factors that occurred during the Kravchuk presidency in Ukraine. These additional factors that aided in a decrease in Ukrainian-Russian relations can be traced to something called Naftogaz. This is the main nationalized oil and gas company within Ukraine that was formed, coincidentally, in the same year Kravchuk took office. I say coincidentally, it's not. Throughout its existence, disputes in pay have existed between Naftogaz and the Russian equivalent Gazprom. During the 1990s, the Ukrainian-Russian gas relationship was characterized by Ukrainian inability to pay for huge volumes it contracted, leading to very high levels of debt and unpaid bills, which in turn led to reduction of Russian gas supplies to Ukraine for short periods of time, aimed at restoring payment discipline, which in turn led to unauthorized divisions of the volumes in transit to European countries. This came to a loggerhead in the 2006 and 2009 gas and oil transit wars, but that's a video for another time. I hope this video has provided information that gives a new perspective on our current situation. And finally, I would just like to say thank you for watching as far as you have done. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and as always, stay opinionated.